And 3, 2, 1. Welcome to The Peaceful Truth, the podcast where we talk about everything from women empowerment, feminism, and everything in between. You are joined by your host, Kenzie. Thank you, ladies and male feminists who have joined me today for yet another episode of The Peaceful Truth. Today, I wanted to talk about sugarcoating a no. So what do I mean by that? So oftentimes, I feel like in a lot of social situations, not all, I feel like I hear no's being sugarcoated. Like someone's like, I'm not really in the mood to do this, or they giggle, or they just don't respond. They're just nervous to flat out tell someone no and look them directly in the eyes and refuse. Another thing that I feel like we sugarcoat is saying stop. So why do people sometimes sugarcoat a no or a stop it? I don't think everyone does this. Like in business, for example, I'm okay, like in my business life, in my professional life, I'm okay with saying no. I know not everyone is, but I'm okay with that, and I can do that. So I know other people don't have to always sugarcoat it, but I feel like it is a common thing. I talked to a lot of my girlfriends this week, and I'm like, do you feel like you struggle saying no when you're in an uncomfortable situation or an awkward situation or a situation you don't want to be in? Do you feel uncomfortable with saying that no? And they all said yes. So I feel like this is a thing. And hi, Binks. Binks has joined an episode of The Peaceful Truth. So why has this come up? Why did this come to my brain? For a few reasons. One, I was out recently where a guy that I'm acquaintances with and that I've hung out with a handful of times was making me uncomfortable, and I couldn't outright say no or stop. But why is that? He was inappropriate in his demeanor. Physically, he was kind of doing what Joe Biden got called out for a few weeks ago, like kissing my head, and got kind of overly fresh in his compliments. And I couldn't figure out afterwards why I couldn't speak up. Another situation I felt like this where a date made me uncomfortable and I just made up an excuse versus outright saying no to their face, which is fine. I got out of both these situations in my own way. In the situation where I was at the bar where I felt uncomfortable, I just giggled uncomfortably in front of that acquaintance and like slowly walked away so nothing could happen. And just in situations like the one in the dating world where I felt uncomfortable, or this acquaintance that I saw out in public that made me feel comfortable, I just feel too bad or feel too nervous or anxious at the second to say outright no or stop. And why can't I speak up, or why didn't I speak up? I think I was afraid of not being polite or seeming like a bitch or just conflict in general. And I thought this episode was important because when I think about it, like, it's practice what you preach, right? I would always tell someone, say like no outright, or say stop outright, and communicate that openly. But I found myself in this situation where I couldn't take my own advice. I was really scared about saying no. And so it's something I wanted to confront head on. I feel like I also just don't like saying no straight up because I don't like hurting people's feelings. And I think that's pretty much why a lot of people feel uncomfortable with saying outright no. But why is it rude to say no? Why do people like take it as an insult? And why do so many women feel uncomfortable with it? I think, of course, like saying no outright depends on the situation. Like if someone is trying to be kind, someone's like asking you to come to something, and you just are not in the mood to go out, or someone's just being kind in some way, saying no politely is fine. Just like saying no, thank you is totally fine. But if it's peer pressure or someone that is making you uncomfortable, shouldn't it just be an expression? Like saying a flat out no, shouldn't that just be an expression of what you want, and the other person to not get insulted and to try to understand that? Like I wish society got to that stage where pride wasn't like so in the middle of it, and by saying no, someone could like maturely accept that. It might not even be a cultural thing. It might be an animalistic human thing that we can't get rid of, but I just wish it wasn't received negatively. But even if someone does take it personally when you say no or stop, is it our problem even when it's a situation that makes you uncomfortable and you want to say no? Shouldn't we just follow our gut? I think yes. Like, you have to take care of yourself. I think in some situations, of course, being polite is definitely called for. But overall, you have to take care of yourself, and it makes you uncomfortable. It's okay to say no, and we shouldn't feel guilty ever because we're following our gut and what makes us happy. So I wanted to talk about tips because I felt like I wasn't practicing what I was preaching, so I wanted to think of tips for myself and for others that might struggle with it, and I'm going to try to implement one of these things, the first tip, this week, and see if next week I can report back whether I actually did it. But a Psychology Today article by Diane Barth says to start practicing in small ways of saying no, like at the grocery store or when someone is trying to sell you something. So I am going to try to say no this week in a small way that isn't sugarcoating something. Another article for tips is by a Forbes article by Christina Park, and she says a good way of saying no and to decline something is keeping it short. So keeping it tight, being able to escape from the situation and walk away. So here's another quote from that article that I really found great. Without the ability to say no, we rob ourselves of the power to control our lives and the way we spend our time. So next time you say no, be polite, but firm, and keep it short. I added the and keep it short at the end of that quote. So another article by Inc.'s Jonathan Alpert says, it's a part of any relationship to set boundaries, which I completely have never thought of, like, every relationship being a one where you had to set boundaries, but it totally makes sense. Like, it's part of a relationship to show like how comfortable you are with certain things. And if you never say no to someone, they could keep pushing that boundary, and the relationship might not work out in the long run, whether it's a friendship or any type of relationship. So here's some other advice from a compilation of different places and just what I remember hearing in life. But saying no to others is saying yes to yourself and what you want. It empowers you to be the boss of your own life. You don't owe anyone anything. You don't have to be mean, but you can say no, give a reason, and why you feel that way. So there are ways to address this no topic well. I'm certainly afraid of it, and I just felt like a hypocrite hosting this podcast, and I couldn't say no to a dude to his face that was making me, two dudes that were making me uncomfortable. Like, I feel like I always preach like strong females and strong women empowerment and to kick butt, but I feel like I didn't implement that, and I want to start. I'm not going to beat myself up over it because what happens in the moment is what you're feeling, and I've learned not to like beat myself up over that, but I think it is something that I value, being able to have my voice and setting my own boundaries. So I think it's important to start saying no straight up. So I'll practice in a small way. I'll report back to you ladies next week and fellas next week. What is one thing you are looking forward to? I always like to wrap it up with this. What is one thing I'm looking forward to? I am looking forward to celebrating one of my best friend's wedding. It's in the fall, but we are like ramping things up this summer, and I'm the maid of honor, and I'm just so excited to celebrate her and her new marriage whenever it occurs. What are you looking forward to this week? What's one positive thing in your life that is keeping you pumped and motivated? It's always important to reflect on that a few times a week. Well, thank you, ladies and fellas, for joining me for yet another week. I'll see you next week. Bye.